The late autumn light of Denver in November slanted through my kitchen window, the kind of pale gold that makes dust hang suspended, turning silence itself into something you could almost touch. Outside, the neighborhood was hushed. Lawns were covered in brittle leaves, and somewhere down the block, I could hear the faint rumble of a snowblower preparing for the first real storm of the season. Inside my house, the air still carried the faint sweetness of cinnamon and nutmeg. I had baked a pecan pie the night before, Anne's old Thanksgiving recipe. She had a way of getting the crust just right, flaky but never dry, tender enough to melt on the tongue. Mine came out denser, heavier, almost clumsy, but it was the closest I could get to her now. The pie sat untouched in the middle of the oak dining table, the same table Anne and I had picked out back in 1987. That table had been the heart of our home. I could still see Michael sprawled across it in middle school, trying to finish a science project at the last minute. I could see Anne setting candles along the center runner every Thanksgiving, the flicker of flame making her face glow. Now there was only me, a cooling pie, and a pot of coffee left too long on the burner, bitter enough to make my throat ache. The phone rang, and for a moment, my chest lifted. Michael. My son. His name glowed on the caller ID like a promise of company, even if it was only a voice. I pressed the receiver to my ear. "Hey, Dad," he said, warm. He asked how I was, whether I'd cooked anything, whether I was eating enough. Jessica's voice chimed in from the background. "Hi, Dad." Bright, chipper, polished like she was talking to a boss, not her father-in-law. I smiled despite myself. "I'm fine," I said. "Though I did something silly yesterday. Forgot to turn off the burner under the coffee pot. Caught it before it did any harm, though." That was when the line went quiet. A pause stretched tight as wire. I could almost see Jessica's face, the crease that always appeared between her eyebrows when she disapproved. Then, softly, she said, thinking I'd already hung up, "Michael, he's deteriorating. Yesterday he left the stove on." Her words landed like stones in my stomach. And then Michael's voice, colder than I had ever heard it. "It's time, Jess. A nursing home. He's a burden. The house alone is worth close to $900,000 now. With Denver's market, we could sell. Move to Boulder. Finally get that place with the mountain view." My hand trembled around the receiver. The pie sat untouched. The coffee turned to sludge. The house suddenly too quiet. On Thanksgiving morning, of all days, I learned that my only son was planning my exile, while counting the dollars of the home Anne and I had built nail by nail. The holiday that once meant warmth and gratitude turned colder than any Denver winter I had ever known. After the call ended, I sat there a long time, the receiver heavy in my hand, Anne's photo staring back at me from the mantel. Her smile was frozen in a frame of walnut wood, taken one Thanksgiving long ago. She was holding a pumpkin pie, her apron dusted with flour, eyes shining the way they always did when she was happiest, when family filled this house. I leaned back into her recliner, the leather worn soft from years of her reading in the evenings. Closing my eyes, I let the silence of the house push me backward in time. I remembered the years I had worked double shifts at the steel plant, coming home with my hair caked in gray dust, my hands too raw to even hold a fork properly. I'd shower, change into clean clothes, and head out again for an overnight shift just to cover tuition bills. Michael wanted to study business at the University of Colorado. I didn't have the money, but I had my back, my sweat, and my will. 4 years, $48,000 in tuition. Every dollar I laid down came with the cost of another sleepless night. Anne would massage my shoulders while I calculated numbers at this very kitchen table. "You're working yourself to death, Arthur," she'd whisper. And I'd answer, "He deserves better than we had. He's smart enough for anything." Then there was the wedding. Michael had fallen in love with Jessica and said she dreamed of a perfect ceremony. He came to me one night, hesitant but insistent. "Dad, I know money's tight, but Jessica's always dreamed of a big wedding. Please." I told him we could afford maybe $8,000 if we stretched. But Jessica cried, and Michael pleaded. And in the end, I worked weekends for 6 months straight, installing hardwood floors for a contractor friend. $32,000. I remember that day as if it were yesterday, dancing with Jessica in her gown, her head resting on my shoulder as she whispered, "You're the best father in the world. I'll never forget this." But she did forget. They both did. Even before that, there had been the small things. Signing as co-signer when Michael's credit was too low for his first car loan, covering rent when he was unemployed for almost a year, picking up their grocery bills, utilities, even when they moved back in temporarily after Michael lost a job. I never complained, not once, because that's what parents do. We give. We don't keep score. Anne had warned me more than once. Don't give him so much that he forgets to be grateful. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking she was too cautious. Gratitude, I believed, was something natural, something children would carry in their bones. But sitting here now, staring at the house I had built, I realized she had been right. Gratitude fades when giving becomes endless. And now my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the man I had bankrolled through every struggle, looked at me not as a father, but as an obstacle. I rubbed my temples, trying to ease the ache, and whispered into the silence, "Anne, I should have listened. God help me, I should have listened." The word burden echoed in my head long after the call had ended. It was as if the walls themselves had heard it, and now they were whispering it back to me in the creaks of the floorboards and the tick of the old clock in the hallway. I walked through the house slowly, as though seeing it for the first time, not as a home filled with birthdays, anniversaries, and Anne's laughter, but as the asset Michael and Jessica had reduced it to: square footage, equity, a number on a realtor's spreadsheet. In the kitchen, my fingers brushed across the granite countertops. Anne had chosen so carefully. She had stood in the hardware store for nearly an hour, running her hand across different slabs until she found this one, gray with gold veining, like sunlight caught in stone, she'd said. To me, it was the memory of Anne's morning coffee, of family breakfasts, of her laughter bouncing off these walls. To them, it was $900,000 in potential equity. I stepped into the living room. The burgundy sofa was still there, the same one where Michael used to sprawl with his textbooks, or where Anne curled up with her novels. Jessica had once commented, years ago, that the furniture looked dated. Now I could imagine her standing here with Michael, saying, "We'll sell it all with the house, start fresh in Boulder." Upstairs, I paused at the doorway to Michael's old room. The soft yellow paint still clung to the walls, chosen on his 16th birthday. Posters of rock bands had faded to shadows, but the white desk I built with my own hands was still tucked beneath the window. I remembered nights spent helping him through algebra, his frustration easing only when Anne brought cookies on a plate. That desk wasn't just wood. It was fatherhood, in every nail and every measurement. To them, it was just another room to stage for resale. The betrayal cut deeper because it wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. My own son was ready to erase the sweat, the sacrifice, the love that shaped every inch of this place. He spoke of me like I was no longer a man, but a liability, a problem to manage. The phone conversation replayed in my head, each word carving into me like ice. Jessica's laugh, light, almost casual, when she said, "He has no idea." Michael's cold calculation about Boulder, about square footage and market value. They were already spending my life's work, already plotting their new beginning, while consigning me to an end I never agreed to. I stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the banister I had sanded myself decades ago. My legs felt weak, but my anger burned steady. I was not a burden. I was a father, and they had forgotten what that meant. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house groaned under the cold Denver wind, and every creak sounded like a whisper. Burden, burden, burden. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, feeling the weight of Anne's absence pressing harder than ever. If she were here, she would have told me not to let them take everything we built. She would have reminded me that silence is not weakness, that love is not permission to be discarded. By dawn, I had made a decision. If my own son saw me only as an obstacle between him and a pile of money, then I would stop being his victim. I drove downtown, the streets quiet from the Thanksgiving holiday weekend. The law office where I had once worked as a paralegal still stood on 17th Street, though the brass plaque was tarnished now. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old leather. Todd Fisher, a friend from those days, greeted me with that same dry humor he always carried. His hair was grayer, but his eyes were sharp. "Roy," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "what brings you in?" I told him everything. Michael's words, Jessica's whispers, the house they had already counted as theirs. Todd listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening only once when I quoted my son. "He's a burden." When I finished, Todd leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "They've underestimated you. Good. That gives us an edge." Together, we laid out a plan. I would put the house on the market myself, sell it before Michael could move a finger. Every document, every signature would be watertight. No loopholes for them to contest. The proceeds would go into a secure account, out of their reach. Later that afternoon, I met Brian Connor, a realtor Todd trusted. He was young, ambitious, his tie slightly crooked, but he knew the Denver market better than anyone. "You'll have buyers within days," he promised. 900,000, maybe more. Walking back to my car, I felt a shift inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't simply drifting through grief and routine. I was taking control. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. At home, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat at the oak table, the same table where Michael had once spread his textbooks. Only this time, I wasn't the father bending to help. I was the man reclaiming what was his. I wasn't just defending a house. I was defending my dignity. And I realized, as the evening shadows lengthened across the floorboards, that perhaps this betrayal wasn't the end of me. Perhaps it was the beginning. The for sale sign went up the following Monday, a thin white board with bold red letters staked into the frozen lawn. For years I had tended that lawn, pushing Anne's old mower under the summer sun, sprinkling fertilizer before the fall. Now I stood at the window, watching strangers slow their cars to read the sign. Brian was right. Offers poured in within days. The Denver market was feverish, hungry. A young couple with a baby on the way fell in love with the bay windows, the fireplace, the very walls that still whispered Anne's laughter. They offered $1,000 cash, no contingencies. By the end of the week, the house wasn't mine anymore. I packed deliberately, not rushing. Anne's photographs, her recipe box, the quilt she stitched the year Michael was born. Everything else I left behind. Let the ghosts stay with the house. Eddie, a locksmith Todd recommended, came by to change the locks. The sound of his drill biting into the old brass felt final, like a gavel striking wood. Before I left, I wrote a letter. Just one page, my handwriting firm despite the tremor in my hand. Michael, Jessica, I heard every word. A burden, you called me. You counted the value of these walls before counting the years I gave you. This house is sold, the money secured where you will never touch it. I am not your pawn, nor your obstacle. I am your father, and fathers are not disposable. Consider this my last lesson. Respect is earned, not inherited. I folded the note and left it on the oak dining table, our table, Anne's table, where I knew they would find it. That Saturday, they returned from Phoenix. I didn't see it, but Todd later told me he had checked the security footage. Michael stepped onto the porch with his suitcase in hand. Jessica right behind him, laughing at something on her phone. They tried their keys. The lock didn't budge. Michael's face shifted from confusion to rage. Jessica rattled the knob until her knuckles whitened. Then Michael saw the paper on the doorstep. He bent, read the words, and for the first time in his adult life my son screamed, not in anger, but in disbelief. A sound like something breaking. Neighbors heard. Mrs. Patterson told me later she had never seen him look so small. I was already gone by then. The movers had delivered my boxes to a modest two-bedroom apartment overlooking Cheeseman Park. The building smelled faintly of fresh paint and Chinese food from Mrs. Chen's place downstairs. My new world was smaller, yes, but lighter, freer. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, the city lights flickering like distant stars. For the first time in years, I breathed without weight on my chest. Justice, I realized, wasn't always in the courts. Sometimes it was as simple as saying no more and meaning it. And in that quiet apartment, far from the house they thought was theirs, I felt Anne beside me whispering, "You did right, Roy. You did right." The first morning in my new apartment, I woke to the sound of children playing in the park across the street. Their laughter spilled through the half-open window, bright and unfiltered, cutting through the silence I had grown used to. For a moment, I lay still, letting the sound settle into the empty spaces Anne once filled. I brewed coffee in a smaller pot now. No need for 12 cups anymore. Sitting at the round kitchen table, a second-hand piece I had picked up from a thrift store, I realized how different the light felt here. Not the warm, honeyed glow of the old house, but a sharper, freer brightness that carried no ghosts. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone. In that stillness, a truth came to me as clear as the steam rising from my cup. I had given everything: time, money, love, forgiveness. And yet, the return had been calculation, entitlement, betrayal. I thought back to Anne's words, spoken one winter evening long ago when Michael was still a boy. "Love him fully, Arthur. But don't lose yourself. One day, he has to stand on his own feet, not on yours." How right she had been. I had mistaken sacrifice for guarantee, believing my devotion would shield me from disloyalty. But love, I understood now, is not insurance. Respect cannot be inherited like property. It must be earned, chosen, lived. That was the real wound Michael and Jessica inflicted. Not their plot for the house, but their blindness to what mattered. They saw walls, equity, resale value. I saw Anne's laughter in the kitchen, Michael's Lego castles on the carpet, birthdays sung off-key. To them, the house was an asset. To me, it was a life. And yet, as I sat there in my smaller home, I did not feel defeated. On the contrary, I felt lighter. The weight of keeping up appearances, of holding on to a house that had turned into a prison, was gone. They had thought me weak, frail, easy to maneuver, but their greed had awakened something I thought I had lost with age: resolve. I began to write again something I hadn't done since Anne passed. Pages of reflection, small stories of the people I met. Mrs. Chen with her quiet humor. The barista Emily, who remembered I liked my latte extra hot. The joggers who waved in the mornings. The world, I realized, still had kindness, still had room for me, if I was willing to step into it. The lesson was sharp but clear. Family without gratitude is just blood. What gives it meaning is love, respect, and memory. I was not just a man cast aside. I was a father who had given his best, a husband who had loved deeply, and now, a man reclaiming his dignity. And dignity, I found, was worth more than any house in Denver. The first Thanksgiving I spent in my new apartment, I set the table for one without bitterness. A modest meal, roast chicken, sweet potatoes, a slice of pecan pie I had picked up from the corner bakery. No sprawling feast, no guests to impress. Just me, the steady glow of a single candle, and the soft hum of the city outside my window. And somehow, it was enough. I looked around the small dining room. White walls, a bookshelf half filled with novels and legal texts I had dusted off after years, a framed photo of Anne smiling in the garden. This was not the grand house we had built together, but it was mine. Mine by choice, not by default. A place not of memories weighing me down, but of lightness carrying me forward. Freedom, I realized, is not about square footage or market value. It is about the ability to wake each morning and know you live on your own terms. When I thought of Michael and Jessica now, it wasn't with rage. Disappointment, yes, but also clarity. They had chosen a path paved with greed and short-sightedness, confusing inheritance with entitlement, love with leverage. Their lesson would not come from me shouting or punishing, but from the silence of absence, the weight of what they had lost when they mistook me for weak. I walked often in the neighborhood park, where families gathered under the golden cottonwoods. Sometimes I sat on a bench and watched fathers push their children on the swings. It hurt, yes, but it also healed. Life was still moving, still offering glimpses of the tenderness I once held. Anne was still with me too, not in the walls of that old house, but in the way I brewed her coffee, the way I hummed the song she loved when I washed dishes, the way I whispered to her before I went to sleep. Love, true love, doesn't fade with relocation. It becomes the compass that keeps you steady even when others try to throw you off course. If there was a message in all this, it was simple. Do not mistake silence for weakness. Do not mistake age for surrender. We fathers, we mothers, we give and we give, often without asking for anything in return. But there comes a moment when dignity demands we stand, even if it means standing alone. So here I am, an old man in Denver, beginning again. Not rich in houses or in children's gratitude, but rich in something deeper, the knowledge that I chose dignity over despair, freedom over fear. And if anyone should hear my story, let it be a reminder. Never treat your parents as a burden. Never confuse their patience with passivity. For when they rise, they may do so with a strength you never imagined. I blew out the candle, letting the room fall into quiet. Outside, the city glowed against the dark, and for the first time in years, I felt no shadows in my heart, only light.